Hi, this is Mike Cuddy, and this is a continuation of my making a 3-column page layout. And in this video, it's the second video, the second part of the video. In this part, we're going to be focused on using CSS Grid. And in the first part I covered making a basic website and adding Bootstrap. And this one, like I said, is going to be CSS Grid. And we're going to end up with something like this, but it won't be using Bootstrap again, it'll be using Grid. Now, I already have the page set up. It's very similar to the last one. We have the 3 containers that are almost identical. I added this extra h3 tag in here, and aside 1 and main and aside 2, and we'll see why I added that in a second in this wrapper. But before I start that, we'll be using Firefox this time, and I'll show why in just a second once we start using Grid. The responsive design aspect that's really neat about Grid that I'll cover, and then a quick word on Flexbox versus CSS Grid, but I'll say it's not really versus, and you'll see what I mean when I get to that. So let's go back to here. So first I have, like I said, these 3 divs, 1, 2, 3, and they basically look like this. So it's the same thing as the last video where we have 3 rows that we want to turn into columns like this. So I have everything wrapped in this class wrapper. My CSS file has nothing in it, and we'll check to make sure it's hooked up like I showed in the last video. I'll just do blue again. And it's good, so I'll take that out. Refresh over here, and now this wrapper is kind of like the mother container that everything else is wrapped in. And I'll use a Flexbox guide right here to kind of show exactly what I mean. So you've got the container, and then these 3 items are inside of it. So each of these div containers, right, like here, 2 and 3, are items within the mother container. So if I go and start in the CSS side, I go wrapper. And just right at the top, I'll put border 2 pixels solid red this time. And you can see there's all the containers that are wrapped in there. And now I'm going to start bringing in the CSS Grid. And all I do with this is I don't use a CDN this time. I just do, it's all part of CSS. And I just do Grid. So I've got that set up there. And then what I'm going to do is go Grid, Template, Columns. I'm going to do 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR. I believe that FR unit is actually new to CSS Grid. Go Template, Rows, and that's 1 FR. Grid, Gap, 1 EM. Actually, I'm going to hold on that for a second, so I'm going to kind of paste that out. And if I refresh this page right here, you can see, oh wow, it's got the 3 columns. And now, if I take out this, you can kind of see it's hard to read right here. What the grid gap does with 1M, and M I think is 16 pixels, it'll put some space in between that. So that's kind of helpful. But I've got my 3 columns areas, and it looks like I'm basically done, but I'm going to add one other thing. Grid, template, areas. One thing to realize is that columns, rows, and areas is plural. It has an S at the end. You have no idea how many times I've used CSS Grid and forgotten that, and it's not working like I want, and it's the most frustrating thing in the world. But I'm going to come back to that in a second. I'm going to go dot 1 for using a class. So this is referring to this div container right here. It's got a class of 1. I'm going to put grid area. This is singular. Aside 1. So this references that subheading, and I'll show you why that's going to be important. It's going to help us. You don't need it in there, this aside 1, but I think it'll show you what I mean in a second. Grid area main. So 2 refers to the main thing, like the center div, and then 3 is going to be grid area aside 2, and that one refers to this one right there, aside 2. So go back up here, and I'm going to put aside 1, main, aside 2. And if I refresh this, nothing seems to have changed. It's still the same. But let's say back on my Bootstrap video, part 1, look at what happens if I make it for go down for like a smartphone. It's got 3 columns and it looks really bad. So I want that fixed. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to use a breakpoint with the media query. So I'm going to go at media only all and max width. Okay, and now since this is cascading style sheets, kind of like a waterfall, I need to use the wrapper, but I don't need all aspects of it. So I want to take this right here. I don't need the display grid because it already applies to it. And I want one column, so I'm going to go down to 1FR. And I'm going to take this one right here, this grid templates area. I'm going to put that. And actually, before I do anything, I'm going to actually go down and set it up already. So it looks like that. But let's say now I'm going to do a side 1. Whoa. Main. Aside 2. And look at, we've got this format. Now if I refresh it, look at it changes. 1, there's aside 1, the main, aside 2, aside 2. But let's say if we want the main on top because it's on a smartphone and we want people to directly see that as soon as they go to the page, and just switch it around. You see all they did is main was in the center between aside 1 and 2, and I just moved it to the top. Aside 1's at the top, refresh. Oh wow, main's now up there. Everything that was in that div, like that 2, is now at the top. And if I want it at the bottom, I'm not sure why you would do that. Go back and delete this. Excuse me, with the cold. And there it is down at the bottom. So that's one huge powerful aspect of using CSS Grid that I like. How it just blew my mind when I learned that, how you can rotate and change stuff like that. And if I go back to the large, it goes back to the center because I have it set up like here. So let's say if I wanted aside 2 in the center. Now I have aside 1, aside 2, main. And it's set up just like how I have it, aside 1, aside 2, main. So we'll go back and put main in the center. Actually, I believe if I go ... it'll leave some blank space. That's not exactly what I wanted, but put main back in there. There we go. So that is using CSS Grid right there. And all I want to say is the quick word about Flexbox for CSS Grid is I've read that it's not one is better than the other. So you can't brag, oh, I use CSS Grid and it's better than Flexbox. You're a loser if you use Flexbox. No, they complement each other. I've seen on a Treehouse tutorial on CSS Grid that they say that Flexbox is more for page alignment, so I could use it to center one and the aside one and make everything centered and aligned. But CSS Grid is used more for the overall web design, like the layout of the page. So they complement each other. They're meant to be used together. And Flexbox could be used for a whole page layout. I've done it with numerous of my projects before I really dove into CSS Grid, but it was quite a painful aspect. And I want to mention here too that CSS Grid, this is only a very brief introduction of what it can do, but I just really wanted to show how you can easily switch stuff around by just using the grid template areas, and down here with breakpoints with media queries, how cool that is to switch it around. That's something that when I learned it blew my mind. Now, I think Chrome can do this maybe with their latest browser called Canary. I'm not sure, but something that's cool about Firefox with CSS Grid is if I inspect element, then go over here to grid, it has this whole grid section. Now watch, if I click the grid overlay, you can actually see it, aside 1, main, aside 2, and it actually shows you like the grid, and here's the grid gap right there. Turn it off, it goes away, and you can even see if I go down, how it'll look right like that. So that's something that's really kind of interesting to me. So that's almost everything in this video of CSS Grid, and I hope you enjoyed watching it. And until next time, have a great day. This is Mike Cuddy signing off.